So a lot has been said about empathy recently, particularly in innovation and technology spheres. We hear that companies like Apple and Google and even more traditional organizations like IBM and General Electric are using this concept of empathy to develop better products and services. But what do we really mean by empathy, and how do we actually obtain it? As design thinkers, empathy is basically putting ourselves in the shoes and in the skin of other human beings. Try to figure out what it's like to be another person. As simple as that. But obtaining empathy is a harder, more tricky situation, right? We suggest that we do 4 things to gain empathy. 1, observe. Sounds very simple, but it could be a little bit weird at first. We have to get very comfortable in simply observing other people's surroundings, other people's behaviors, their patterns. And we do this essentially by being very patient and very aware, by spending time really analyzing, thinking, observing, sensing what other people are doing around us. We can do this in many different ways. We can take a lot of mental notes or physical notes or use cameras. We can shadow people and essentially follow them around many times with their consent to be able to get a better sense of what it's like to actually lead a day-to-day process along with them. Observation is actually a very natural thing if you think about it. We people watch all the time. Go to a coffee shop or stand on a corner of a street and then you'll realize that people love to look at each other. We're wired to observe. So keep these things in mind when you're trying to take that very first step of empathy, which is observation. Second step of empathy is interaction and asking questions, right? Approaching people and trying to learn what it's like to lead their lives. Many times when we approach people, especially if we don't know them, we focus on very superficial stuff. Like, for example, the weather in Norway. We love to talk about the weather here. Or Latin America, where I'm from, we talk about politics or football, for example. We have to get much deeper than that quickly. So the best way to get deep and to really understand why people do the things that they do is by asking the question, why? Right? Not only once, but asking it twice, 3 times, 4 times, maybe even 5 times, to really quickly eliminate these superficial answers and little by little get deeper and deeper into the reason why people do the things that they do. It's also really helpful to ask open-ended questions. So as opposed to asking, do you like the color red? Which will only give you the answer yes or no. You can ask people to tell you stories, right? So tell me a story about the last time that you really enjoyed observing or sensing the color red. Just an example. Right? So ask really wide open questions, ask people to tell you stories, and focus on the question why. Once you've engaged people and you've gotten into these conversation modes, it's important to take the third step, which is basically immersion, to try to put ourselves truly into the skin of someone else. And we do that by experimenting life as if we were someone else. We can get really creative around this. We can play roles, for example, and really interact and involve ourselves in someone else's life. Patty Moore, a very famous product designer, actually turned into an 85-year-old woman when she was in her 20s. And she did this to really get a sense of what it was like to walk as like an old lady would walk with a hunchback, right? And she would sense how people started to observe her in a very different way. And that gave her a much better sense of what it was really like to be an 85-year-old woman. Immersion can be tricky, it can sometimes be dangerous, so be careful, but it's incredibly important to get a first-hand view of what it's like to be someone else. And finally, I'll encourage you to take step number 4, which is to be as vulnerable and as open as possible. Because empathy goes both ways. It's a reciprocal phenomenon. You can't ask people to open up to you when you're not willing to open up to them. So if you keep these 4 things in mind, hopefully you'll become a better empathizer and at the end of the day, a better innovator as well.